It's been a while since I've popped up, and as usual, I'm just going to do this a little bit free form. Uh, it's getting to be winter now, and today is actually my birthday. So, thanks, Mom. I'm sure you were rather uncomfortable right around this time 57 years ago. But if you appreciate the contributions I've been making, I owe it all to my mom and dad. So birthday day today, and I'm here in Hot Springs. I've had a really good year looking back on it. Last New Year's, we had a ceremony with gongs at like a metaphysical center with Buckminster Fuller Dome, and I don't know what it was, like a ceremony. You were supposed to sort of write down things you wanted to let go, and then things you wanted to bring in, and you would put the things you wanted to let go, and they would take it out and put it in the bonfire. And I was just revisiting the things that I wanted to bring in for the year, and I feel like I really checked a lot of boxes. And it was a year of a lot of healing and being grounded in this place and being comfortable with myself and being out in nature and being out in water. And so I got all of those things, and I was super excited about that. And I've really been appreciating lately the significance of story, the idea of story and narrative as a technology, and how we can really change our stories, and we can be sort of meta about the stories. I keep saying I think the future of information processing is an animus live action role play musical where we're all curious observers stepping in and out of our roles. But yeah, the story that we tell about what's happening, which kind of goes in with Carl Friston's free energy principle and active inference, it matters. And I put up a couple clips from this guy, Angus Fletcher, who's a professor of narrative or story science at, I think, Ohio State, and worked a lot with the intelligence community, and I think John Rogers. And, he was saying that really one of the most important things about sort of our own mental well-being is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And that people who are sort of in a good place, they have sort of a mental structure where they can look back on their past history and find meaning in it, that it's sort of braided it together into like a tight strand that makes sense, but that the future is open, sort of wide. So he talks about it being like a trident. So like a coherent past and then a lot of future options. Which I'm working on stepping into. It's hard to see all these future options, but I think I can see more than a lot of people. But in people who are having a more difficult time is their past identity is really fragmented and they can't find a through line, and the future that they're projecting is really, really narrow. And what I'm feeling into, even though I'm not really connected to normal news or social media these days, but sometimes I do watch YouTube videos and I can see the things in the column on the side, like recommended videos, and they're all sort of like, the world is going to end because of AI. And people are still not really talking about spatial computing or Web3 or blockchain. They're just really, it's a really narrow future and it's very dark. And I think what I've proven to myself of this past year is that actually you can choose to be an active co-creator of your story and a curious observer, and the story as is told in the public is there's way more that you could be telling to embroider the story or have subplots or have alternate futures than what's generally laid out. And so if we get like hooked into certain cycles of what is definitely going to happen, which I used to do in the past, I used to sort of see a certain slice and project a future that felt often kind of dire and dark. And the more practice you have at like looking around the margins at all these other options, then you realize you don't need to necessarily, you can acknowledge that the reality of dark places without having to live there. And you can peek in and you can look, but then you can be like, yeah, but there's all this other stuff going on behind. And really this past year, I've had so many blessings, and I'm really grateful that I was just talking to my friend Drew, who had first introduced me to the Chinese farmer parable. Like, is it good or is it bad? People will be like, oh, that's terrible, but that's great. And often you just don't know what the next thing is. So, back in 2023, when my ex was like, yeah, I've been seeing this other person for 2 years and we're all leaving you and your kid isn't talking to you and your dad's dying and you don't have a job. And I'm probably going to have to sell the house because of the taxes and all of this stuff. It all seemed really dark and dire, but I rewrote my story, not without some struggle and sadness and processing, but now it turns out Hot Springs is just like a magical, wonderful place that I can be myself and belong and contribute. And for a while there, I wasn't really sure how I was going to find that place. But it's here. For me, it's here. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but for me, it's here. And so I have like really interesting things that I can still work on researching, and I can, I have, a comfortable place to be, and I have friends, and we cook together, and we're in nature together, and we play together. And, this fall I had these 3 salons over at the Star Portal in Mountain Pine, which were excellent. And, and we can do the becoming thing. And so I've healed a lot, and I benefit. So there are so many people here who really like lean into the energy work, right? And so I have the economics and tokens, and they have the energy, and we're kind of figuring out how they all come together to figure out an operating system that would work for us, where we're playing our own infinite game for ourselves and the benefit of our community, and not for like a global hedge fund. and I think we can totally do it. And so it's still a process. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my salon. I had 3 sessions. I will post a link to the slide decks. I didn't record them because I'm finding now that I have real relationships in the real world where I can be my authentic self, but also still pursue my research and engage in interesting thought experiments and imaginative ideas. That there's a lot of really cool synchronicities that happen and things that build on one another, both with people here and people who've like come to visit me and people who are in my like closer relational field. But a lot of these overlaps and synchronicities and findings and research threads really involve their lives. And it's not my place to like pull them into some sort of semi-public space like a YouTube video. That just doesn't feel appropriate. And so as the synchronicities build and build and build on one another, like you can't even just slice out one section, because it really only makes sense within this larger experiential tapestry. And so this past year, there's been so much. It's been really deep and enriching and thought-provoking, but I'm not in a position to share it like I used to, because I'm not researching just abstract people like Michael Bloomberg that based on a public appearance. It's things that are like happening in my own energetic field. And so I guess this is just to say, like, I'm continuing to do this work, but even though I'm quiet online, there's a reason. And that's why I didn't record the salons, because it's less informational. And really what I realized, it was about building community and building what I would call a collective intelligence, which it's not like I invented it. This is a community that has a lot of cohesion for quite a number of years in its own way. And I was like adding another layer, or like another spice to the soup, another ingredient to the soup as it's bubbling along. And so I can share my slide deck if you'd like to look at it, and maybe from the slide deck you can have a sense of the clips that I was talking about. But unfortunately, there's no good way to imagine the experience. So I'll just describe it in sort of broad outlines. I did it once a month, the fourth Saturday of the month, for September, October, and November. And I think there's gonna be a larger solstice celebration bonfire later in December, and we're gonna make clothespin fairies and hang them in the woods. But really central to the Star Portal, it was it's a 1910s probably wooden church, and it was bought right around the beginning of the lockdown period, and really held together and fixed up with a lot of love and sweat equity by people who came before me. And it's really lovely, because Arkansas, because of the temperate climate and the bugs and the humidity and the termites and lack of a huge amount of economic resources, a lot of things don't last architecturally. They're frame, and they have a certain time period. Maybe they last 50 years or 70 years, and then they're gone. So having like even a 1910s church is pretty amazing. It has these large, big glass windows, not stained glass, just clear glass, but big. And they look out on a meadow of the neighboring property, and there are horses that come right up to the fence, which is maybe only 10 feet outside the windows, and have these big heart fields, the horses there. And so it's about 3 acres. It's on about 3 acres. And so there's a sanctuary, which is where like we do the events and presentations, and then there's a little kitchen where we have our potlucks, and Stars vegan, so they're vegan potlucks. And then there's a couple acres. There's an open area under some trees where people park, and then there's woods. And at the far end of the woods is a creek, and it's Glazypo Creek, and I've talked about that it means Paul's Salt Lick. And so I really feel like people are like, why are you doing this salon? Like, what is this about? And I said, well, I think it maybe is just a soul alchemical process for me. And I'm offering it free of charge for anyone who wants to participate and be part of my process and learn some things and do some arts and crafts. And people were really good with that. So, initially, the initial session, we talked a lot about the Curious Observer, which is something in my toolbox that I think is super, super duper important for me to keep a balance on the situation, because we never know. We don't know all the things. We're not going to know all the things. Even if we had infinite time, we would never know all the things. And so there's nuance in which we think we totally understand what's going on, but then there's something flips, and then everything is different. And so you just, like, if you hold the Curious Observer space, you don't have to be invested in any particular outcome. And I find that a refreshing new option. So we talked about that, and we talked about the infinite game of playing to continue to play, and where it's less having an opponent and more like a conversation. There's a step and a step and a step and a step, and things keep going. And that conversation to me really evokes Gordon Pask. And I've talked about the cyberneticist Gordon Pask and second order cybernetics, and that we're in communication with our environment. That's the ontopoetics. And we're in communication with one another, and we're back and forth and back and forth. And we inhabit our egos and our identities, but sometimes we have more than one identity. And actually this fall, I was able to be a member of the Renaissance Fair with Sophia Rose, my friend Roxy. Her alter ego is Sophia Rose, Queen of the Gypsies. And I got to develop a whole alter ego, which was Avelina Locke, the Chatsworth Hedge witch who keeps the dye garden of Bess Hardwick, where Mary Queen of Scots was under house arrest and working on encryption and embroideries, sleep bed linens, and I think they were encrypted bed linens. And so it was a super amazing thing to have like like a character you can inhabit for a time and then step out. And it's intentional. It's not like it's multiple personality disorder, but like, hey, it's kind of fun to be like, well, what would Avelina do in this circumstance, right? And you can kind of lean into that. And so the conversation, you can be theatrical, you can do psychodrama, you can play things out with seriousness, but also knowing that you can step out of the game and process and integrate it and have a sense of distance from it, that it doesn't have to be all visceral in your heart all the time, which is super nice. So we talked about those two things, and then we set up, we called it a temenos, which is in ancient classical antiquity, it was a sacred grove where you would do spiritual work. And so I had carved out a little piece of the woods with a jute rope, where I'm using all natural materials, and then I hung from one of the tree a little salt lick, like for horses or something like that. And then we connected the rope, the tree with the salt hanging on it, to Glazypo Creek by a rope. And then we braided the two together because we had the wood wide web and the flow state of the water. And actually and we're in Garland County, and there's something called the Flower Garland Sutra, which is the Indra's net and the interpenetration of everything. And then to that clothesline, over the course of the fall, all of these different art projects that we would do, we would we would come and we would hang them and sort of build up the energy of the grove. And it was super fun because I have this garden here. At this point, it's been raining and really cold for the past 5 or 6 days. And so all the things that were a little bit hanging on, they're done now. But it was magnificent. And it was really like being part of a complex emergent system. And it was co-creative. Like it was creating me and I was creating it. And just the amazing bees. And I was listening to something about bees. They were talking about like the native bumblebees aerodynamically, like really their little wings shouldn't be able to hold up their big bobbly bob bodies, but that there's something like they create vortices of air under them, and that's what helps hold them up. And the vortices have their own dynamics. And so this little side yard that I dug out, it was full of, on one side it was zinnias, these big tall zinnias, and some Tithonia Mexican sunflower. And then on the other side were celosia, which started out teeny, teeny, tiny, but they're an African plant. They're related to coxcombs, and they had these big pink magenta floral things. And by the end of the summer, and I didn't even water them in Arkansas, they love Arkansas heat. They were 7 feet tall, and they were like making amazing magic wands. And the bees loved them, both the zinnias and the celosia. And that was my walking path through to the backyard with my wheelbarrow. And it was really encroaching. Like as the summer went on, the path got narrower and narrower, and I would go through the path, and they never stung me. And what I'm realizing later with the little vortices and the under their thing is like, it's almost like it was like a sound bath of pollinators every time I went through that trail, and I really miss them. And the hummingbirds were all there too. So there's all of this frequency. And I ordered a book that hasn't come yet, but it was mentioned by somebody in one of the comments of a video I was watching about Goethe and his interest in sort of the morphic field, like pre-Sheldrake and pre-Steiner and pre all of these people, Sello and Eisenstein and Kamvar, this morphic field. And because Goethe was looking at plants, he was doing color theory and plants, and the idea that at the junction between the etheric and the material, like the plants are able to sort of restructure light into the material, like from the etheric into the material. So like being with plants, and I have this other book, Keith Critchlow, he does a lot with sacred geometry, and he looks about the sacred geometry of plants and the symmetries, the rotational symmetries of plants. And so, yeah, I was just totally grounded and immersed in this process. And I kind of like messed up my arm a little bit. Like I said, like some people have tennis elbow, like I have shovel elbow. It was just me, and people were like, how did you do this? I'm like, it's just me and my spade and my wheelbarrow and the municipal compost center. And it's funny because I would go to the compost center so much, and they had tall piles. Some of the compost had biosolid, so I didn't really use the biosolid stuff, but they would have leaf compost, which was just leaves, which is great. And then they had 3 grades of mulch. And so I would bring all the grass that I dug up from my yard and leave it for them to compost. And then I would go and fill up on leaf mulch and wood chips and do my garden. And I did that all spring and summer into the fall. And at one of the last visits, this guy comes up, and he's driving the big wheelbarrow, the big front end loaders, moving stuff, and their mulch piles are like 3 stories high, and it's a really great actually organization. And he just came up, and it was a slow day because it was like rainy and cold, and not many people were there. And he said, do you mind? Most people are just too shy to say anything, but we have some regulars here. We have the Mercedes lady, and then we have the redhead Alex, and we call you Subaru Sally. So I have another alter ego besides Avelina Lock the Hedge Witch. I'm also Subaru Sally, the compost, the compost dropper offer. So anyway, so super fun, like in being all connected in this complex system that's emergent and cyclical, and seeing like which things are really slow starters and they come into their full glory in the autumn. And like I had all this Nicotiana, this flowery tobacco that like really did not get going until August, but now it's still out there, and I'm pointing out, I'm like, look, it's tobacco, isn't it beautiful? And, I planted several hundred bulbs. And so it's all of this resonant energy of vibration and color and frequency. And it is kind of my art and my co-creation, but we're creating each other, which I think is so important. And in that, like the garden is a story, and it's a song, and it's like how we tell it and how we engage with it. And so even as much as I'm still in my head and I'm still reading books and I still watching video or talking about things, I have this groundedness of my body, of my embodiment. And it's been great with all the other little beings. So we made a temenos. The first one we painted sycamore bark, and I brought in a bunch of things, flowers, because the flowers were my introduction. They were my connection, like my entree, because the star who manages the portal, for many years, she was she spent her career in nuclear medicine, actually, with radioactive isotopes doing testing, but then became disinclined to that and worked in flower essences. And so it was just a different titration of energy medicine, right? It was a much more subtle and sophisticated form of energy work with the flower essences. And so me having this garden added authenticity to my process. Like, yes, I'm all up here in my head about economics and bioelectricity and blah, 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 but I can grow things. And so I brought my flowers, I brought my marigolds and my celosia and my little peppers, and we strung garlands that day. And we had watercolors and we painted on the bark of the sycamore trees, which are very spiritual. And we made garlands and we hung them on the clothesline. And we christened our sacred grove. And it was really amazing, because I would say I am definitely on the younger side of the group here. And maybe, the average age of a lot of my friends is maybe like 74 or so. And it's so awesome to have like role models of how it is, like how I can strive to be 20 years from now. It's really rewarding, but also to be able to give and contribute, where I can to the community. So, but in that making, in that ingression of this idea of the temenos of the sacred grove that day, like we were setting little stone cairns to demarcate it, and we had wheelbarrows going, and we were stringing garlands. And, I said, how many places in North America that can I be sitting here talking about Michael Levin and interdimensional archetypal fields and digital currency, and we're painting on and making flower garlands. It felt like really special. Not that it has to be special, but it did actually feel kind of special. And everybody was all into it. And then what we realized is that it was much easier to process what I was saying, rather than trying to sit and pay attention, I said, just pretend I'm a podcast. Like that I'm, that you're just listening to me in the kitchen while you're puttering around doing stuff, right? Like while you're painting or doing this. If you need to get up or get something or refresh your water or whatever, that's fine, right? Like I'm just here and we're creating an energy field together. And what sticks, sticks, and what doesn't, and that's fine. And so that's what we went with the next two. So then the second session, it was a very rainy day, so it was a smaller group, but I brought in tons and tons of flower stuff, and we did entanglement and collective intelligence. And so we were talking about and knot theory and topology. And reality is this sort of manifolds of math and dancing and swirling, and how things went together and did this sort of, and actually a lot of knot theory is also related to cord magic, and a lot of the cord magic is related to fiber arts, and a lot of the fiber arts are sort of women's work, and so that was a really interesting thing. So we made all of these weavings of natural materials, and I brought wool roving and yarn, and we wove things, and I had a big tripod that I set up with warp and weft or whatever, the up and down things, when rainbow colors, and we wove things into it, and then we took that out to the temenos. And what I decided, and it kind of came to me, I have a friend here who has a really long-standing yoga practice, and she does kirtan, which is singing yoga. I think I mentioned that before, that I really enjoy that. And one of the mantras that they do regularly that I really like, that the saying is Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. And that's sort of, may all beings be happy and free. And sort of, may what I put into the world help that happen. And so that was sort of the overarching principle of this, is that may all beings be happy and free. Like however that, and like your version of happy might not look like my version of happy, but as long as we're not stepping on each other's toes about it, that's cool. Like we just, in my live action role play, God likes variety. And so all of the things there's room for, the things to happen. Just we shouldn't hurt one another in how we go about it. And so so we closed with the mantra, and I had a friend come, and she wrote poetry, so we did poetry and we do meditation together. So it's very interactive. And so that was the second one, the entanglement and collective intelligence. And then the final one we did was about heart coherence. And this was going back to Bernard Lietaer, who was the guy, the economist who rolled out the euro. But my friend Steffers had found for me an interview that he did in like 2008, towards the end of his career, that says, yes, I did that, but my main work is actually in esoteric energy work and sacred geometry. And it turns out that his protege, Galia Benartzi, who was from Palo Alto, but also Israeli, they piloted that Lev heart currency in Israel, which was essentially kind of like putting up like a mom's babysitting co-op on blockchain, but they called it Lev, hearts. And the guy that she worked with, Ari Ben David, was the contact for anthroposophy in Jerusalem. So there's like kind of a Steiner overlap there. And so I thought, wow. And then there was another clip that I had that I've shared on my channel of this EOS coin, and that the people, this was a $4 billion initial coin offering in 2018 that kind of went sideways with Brock Pierce and the Bitcoin people. And sort of, you can imagine Steve Bannon, who is Brock Pierce's like sidekick in his digital gold China project, in the background out there somewhere. But in this EOS coin rollout, they were very secretive about what the name actually stood for, the E in EOS. And but they said, look at our logo. And it turns out the logo was this polyhedron, 7-sided, that had 4 equilateral triangles and 3 kites. And it made something called a chestahedron. And that was sort of formalized by a sculptor, Frank Chester, in 2000. And he was spent his career doing industrial design and vocational welding, and did a lot of metalwork. And he was really, when he in retirement, did sacred geometry, and he sort of formalized the shape. And the idea of the shape was that it when it spins, it makes a vortex, and it's like the vortex of the heart field. And so that same year, in 2018, Brock Pierce was really promoting the chestahedron, which was the EOS logo, and made a very large version of it at Burning Man. And you know, what I'm going to put forth is very counter to most of what you'll hear out on the internet now, but I really think that the future of information processing is, if you look up, I've been saying psychic ant computer for a while, right? Or an Animus live action role play musical, both of which will probably seem very obscure. But if you Google collective analog computer, I think that that's what it is. And I think that there's an aspect of the future of information processing looks squishy and wet and like biology, because we actually are the supreme computers. Like, our bodies function at a much higher and faster rate than anything that we can engineer in silicon. And so there's likely going to be some structure within these Web3 spatial computing systems that I actually think are ancient energy systems of chi and prana, but we just put a new costume, a new story around it. And that we're interacting with these systems of holding patterns, these archetypal patterns, which is something that Levin is speaking a lot about, and Richard Watson, and that there's some back and forth dance between our embodied sort of psychodrama field access through art and ritual, and an engineered system that is holding all the incoming patterns and sourcing them out and sort of saying, hey, maybe it's a this, or maybe have you thought of that, or sifting through in a way that our individual intelligences can't. And that there's a coordinating factor in the collective intelligence that is a mutualist relationality to an engineered intelligence that looks like a lichen, or other things like the Wood Wide Web, that it is organic. And so far from AI eliminating everything, it actually is a big game changer, but it's an infinite game. And there's a lot of potential of revisiting who we are as humans, as spiritual beings, as creative beings, as imaginative beings, as loving beings, to occupy that space in a way that holds more the frequency of love than fear. And that's where I've landed for now, is that I would much rather do love than fear. And so it was World Peace Pole Day. Star has a peace pole. And again, the old me would be like, oh, peace, I know what that is. That's Kenneth Boulding and his homeostasis and Irvin Laszlo and blah, blah, blah. I might have been grumpy about it, but I'm like, no, I actually am more for world peace in whatever form. And I'm going to introduce this idea of the Flower Garland Sutra. And we made garlands of hearts that we painted, and then we tied on white chrysanthemums, and we hung them from the boxes, the flower boxes in front of the peace pole. And I tied some celosia to it because for me, they're my magic wands and flames of spirit and heart, and Star really likes Saint Germain and the violet flame, so the violet works there. And we held that space for the heart space. And what was amazing, and this is how this community is so dynamic, in that it's like harmonizing, like we're on a certain waveform, and maybe that's related to the quartz, but everyone brings their special sauce. And so I have a friend who for many years was a naturopathic veterinarian, who then became a sculptor in reclaimed materials, some of which was a lot of metal, but also organic and like bone that was found, like animal bones. And this friend made a chestahedron and donated it to the space. And then Star donated to have it powder coated so it could be outside in galactic purple, because that's her color. And I also love purple. And I said, oh my gosh, it's like a spaceship, right? Because it's like Jane in the Enderverse, in the AI, like holding the pattern and taking it outside. A spaceship can just look like a plain room with a chair if you're meditating and doing astral projection or whatever. So that was really cool. So we inaugurated that. We connected Star's 7-pointed star, which is actually an alchemical symbol, with the 7-sided polyhedron. And I filled it full of acorn caps, which is like these little caps holding all of our prayers for good things. And in the middle, I had a bowl of 50 daffodil bulbs and quartz crystals, and I had pre-dug the holes, and then we all planted the daffodils in the woods. And then we moved the acorn caps over with the quartz crystals and made a big circle around the chestahedron. And it was beautiful. And then we went in, and what did we do? Oh, and then I made little watercolor versions of chestahedrons, and we all painted our own chestahedron. And I'm thinking about doing a pop-up art project in Hot Springs where we make guerrilla chestahedrons with like haiku poetry and like leave them around places downtown and see what happens, because I think that would be really fun. And I'm like definitely leaning into the fun space. And we had a potluck afterwards and a bonfire, and I brought in the last of my tomatoes and basil, which is pretty awesome to be able to do that in November. And we tie-dyed. And by that point, I'm always planning one too many activities. And so most of the people had like stepped off. But Star, who was like a lot of these folks are the original Flower Children, like the Summer of Love folks. And she's like, I've never tie-dyed. I'm like, you're from California and you're, in your early 80s and you never tie-dyed? So we're tie-dyeing. And I had made these little pennant flags and cut out hearts out of them. And so then I wanted to hang them in the woods, and sort of like prayer flags, but the heart coherence. And so, so some of us, we did the tie-dye, and then I, of course, had more. So the next couple days I kept tie-dyeing, and now I have like 150 tie-dye little pennant flags. And so that's what I've been working on the last few days. And we have like lots of purple and pink, and we're gonna have folks take them individually and set affirmative intentions for the community in the new year, and then sew them onto a jute rope, and then we're going to hang these in the woods. So this year I'm still kind of in the healing and personal, I guess, composting the big changes that have happened to my life in the last few years. And so I'm not really doing holiday decorations, even though my sweet neighbor across the street has, I'm enjoying her decorations. And I do really love driving around Hot Springs and just seeing like the people's Christmas lights and their blow up decorations in their yard and things. But I'm not doing a Christmas tree this year, but I actually just spent, being today's my birthday, I treated myself to ordering some of these German wooden ornaments that my ex's mother, whom I never met, but she was from East Germany, and there's this area called the Erzgebirge, which is a mining area, but they also, I guess in the winter, they would carve little wooden toys. And so they would have, there were some vintage German wooden Christmas ornaments we still had from his family that were they meant a lot to me. And so I, was dividing up the Christmas ornaments, as like the cleaning up, right? The disassembly of the family. And so I ordered some for myself. And I think so next year I'm getting ready mentally that I can reclaim these pieces of myself. Um, but yeah, but I'm doing it, at one point, and it was said more out of pain than out of a solid place because I wasn't there yet. But I said, I'm going to go make my corner of the world beautiful. And that's all I can control. I can't fix the world. I'm stepping out of the Good Girl program. That didn't work. And I'm going to go make my corner of the world beautiful. And I did. And I made a beautiful garden, and I made space for us to learn about interesting things and make crafts and work with nature and make a beautiful place in the garden. And I'm centering it all in love. And I'm realizing the world is actually kind of magic. And I'm realizing that Kevin Owaki and his Gitcoin people, when he has his comic books with attractor fields and interdimensional tokens, like he's got a point. There are these attractor fields, and which is not to say that you have to just totally check out on the negative things as if they're not there. But where you put your attention, I do think it makes a difference. And if you can find a way to tell a story that both encompasses the hard things, but leaves this broad, as Angus Fletcher would say, integrated self, broad horizon of positive possibilities, you can navigate through that. Like, yeah, some of those channels may be really bumpy and not good, but like out of all of them, you got a lot of options. So like paint the breadth of the options, and that's what I'm learning, and have a lot of support here. And that was the gift. I mean, I think that the gift for me was where you are, you're too much. And that's you're too much for people, and it's hard. And I never meant for the person that my becoming process, I didn't mean to hurt people with that. But sometimes there's a process. You got to go through the process. And, I hope at some point there can be some resolution around that and me acknowledging my role in that. And, but the good news is, God, the universe, the blessings took me to the place where I needed to be, and that I can actually learn new lessons and learn them in collegiality and humility and openness, but also have something cool to add to the mix. Which is great, which is super great. So, So anyway, thanks everybody out there who's been a blessing on my life this year, and who's taught me things, and who's held space for me. And I'm so grateful. And in closing, I'm just going to say, so this, like, I've been making various stuff. This is so creative. This is a place literally I can channel like my inner 8-year-old and play in the woods and make things and explore fanciful ideas and dance and sing and be in nature. And it's something I could never even have imagined. Again, not that I still cherish and love all the me's. All the Allisons get to come, right? From the littlest Allison to the what felt like at the time abandoned Allison to the reintegrating Allison. It's all this spiral, right? This looping spiral. And so this summer, that so we're in Garland County, the Garland County Library, they have adult programs. And one of my friends said, oh, hey, they're doing ice tie-dyeing at the library. Do you want to come? And so I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. Like we'll do, and I've never done ice tie-dyeing. And it's super interesting from a phase shift flow dynamic thing, is that you soak. So I didn't want a t-shirt because I don't need any more t-shirts, but I love linen. So I took a section of yardage of white linen, and you soak it in soda ash. And then everybody got a little disposable aluminum tray, like 9x13 tray. And then you put like a little roaster rack on the top of it. And then you would start to do the rubber bandy part. And what I really liked was I like the spiral. I have a good friend here who works in interdimensional spaces and spiral energy and seashells. And so I was working and I tried my best to like make these spirals and hold it together with the rubber bands and do the things. And then you made it, you got it all tightened up, and then you put ice on it. And then on top of the ice, you would put this certain kind of rather expensive tie-dye powder. And then the powder would melt into the ice and it would kind of flow around each other and make these interesting patterns. Now the dye, I think there were only like 8 choices of colors. So it wasn't like you had infinite colors, but they would sort of blend. And so I think I picked red and purple and yellow. And because I do like purple myself. And so I did that, and then it came out pretty cool, actually. And so I washed it and took it home and let it sit for a day and washed it, and then untie-dyed it. And some of the spirals took really well and some not so much. And I thought, well, I should do something with this, but I was super busy in my garden all summer. So it just sat in back in the sewing room. And then the last 2 weeks, I was like, oh, you know what? I want to do embroidery with this. And again, thinking fiber arts, right? And thinking knots and magic and cording and weaving, because everyone keeps telling me like I'm a story weaver, which is kind of fun. And my ex's mother, who I never met, Hannah Laura, she was a weaver. And I feel like maybe she's looking over my shoulder in a good way. And so I started doing this embroidery work, just simple running stitch in like using all 6 strands, fat strands. And I was tracing the spirals on the tie-dye. And, that's the thing too about my friends that have, the background in yoga, is like the idea of the sutra and the stitch and like the process of doing the stitch. And it is very meditative to do this kind of, I always hated things like cross stitch where you had to count. And then if you got off like by 1 and you realized it 8 rows later and everything is messed up and it's so frustrating, that's not me. I'm very much like, just go with it. And so, so I'll show you, this is, I ended up making a shawl. So I added some linen, purple linen border, and this is kind of how it looks. You can see some of the spiral bits, and then maybe you can see the stitches that go in. So very simple, and it's long. It keeps going. But wait, there's more. Woo! And the interesting thing about the fabric, what I realized is my other big project for Avelina Locke, the Hedge Witch at the Renaissance Fair, is we needed a costume and it had to be authentic. And well, it turns out they were a little bit softer with the restrictions, but I wanted it to be authentic and I wanted to sew it. And so I ended up sewing a kirtle, which is, so the town that we were representing was Cudworth in 1575, which was Elizabeth and John, and John Dee on the side there. And so a kirtle is like an overdress. So you would have a smock, which would be the thing you would regularly wash. And it had like a fluffy neck and fluffy sleeves and whatever, and then a kirtle, which was linen over it, and it would lace. And I laced up the sides because I did not really want like a front lace thing. And then I had an apron, and I had my basket, and I made a little head thing with ivy leaves, and I had a whole story, and I made like an interdimensional labyrinthine communicator network with quartz crystals and dandelion leaves and little triangular pieces of linen and cord magic little jute thread. And I gave away like 100. And so I'm like, we're all part of this quantum network, like, to navigate our dream states and our challenges, and we can access each other's informational fields, and it would be all really good. And I loved it. It was super fun. But I didn't have the whole backstory on my character. I had a name, and then I started needing to put it together. And then I was like, well, how? Because I didn't want to pretend to be a gypsy, because I was not, but I was with the gypsies. So how would a 50-year-old woman end up with the gypsies? And I'm like, well, what happened to my family, right? And then initially I was like, oh, they died in the plague, probably, whatever. But then if you look up the timing for that particular town, which is north of Sheffield, it's not actually, it wouldn't have worked timing-wise. Even influenza or plagues, there wasn't a big thing that happened. And then I was like, oh my gosh, well, what if we're on these resonant timelines, and somehow, like in some alternate universe, me wishing like my family was, not me wishing them to be dead, but telling a story that they died is a negative outcome on them. So I want to do that. So essentially, the story is that we were on a little, like householder farm on the Chatsworth property, and in Chatsworth, Los Angeles, which Emily Moyer often talks about, is it's the same Chatsworth. The developer of the Chatsworth in Los Angeles was from that area of England. And later, actually, John Bartram sent seeds to later generations of people who had formal gardens there, these early geometric gardens with fountains and flow states. So there was all that stuff going on. But I was like, oh, well, maybe my husband, John Locke, is the assistant gamekeeper. And because, you don't always want to be the fanciest person, the assistant gamekeeper, and he goes out on the moor and doesn't come back. And then I don't know why he doesn't come back. Then I go look for him for a while and I can't find him. And then the winter comes and, Bess wants to give the house to somebody else who has a bigger family and I have to leave. And so, and then I go to my kid's house in Sheffield, who's, in with a cutlery merchant, because Sheffield's known for cutlery, but it's very bourgeois. And I'm like a very earthy, I take after my grandmother who raised me, and she was a bit of a hedge witch, a nice Catholic hedge witch, but you can't be Catholic anymore. And so rather than like suppress myself into sort of bourgeois Sheffield cutlery world, I end up meeting up with the gypsies who are coming through town. My friend, who is her name was Care to Win, and she's admiring my dandelion dyed yarn. And so I decide to like be a burden, take a burden off my kid and just go with the gypsies and take care of their gardening. So that was like my whole story, but I had to develop it, and it developed as I was making the costume. So it's really interesting, this idea of like how you interface with the world through clothing and through your skin and your aura and your energy. And like, as I made the costume, the character developed, because I was like, well, what town will I be from? And how will this happen? And so the firmer the costume got, the more the story developed. And it was a really good story. And I'm totally imagining, because I mentioned, I was listening to a couple of recent Rupert Sheldrake talks on his channel, and now he's promoting British pilgrimages, which is super interesting, with the morphic resonance. And I guess he has one kid who's doing fungal stuff and another kid who's doing, I can't remember, Sean was telling me about what the other kid was doing, but it's definitely networking, like organic networking. And yeah, so he's doing pilgrimages, and then he literally, in one of the interviews, he says, you could do it as social prescribing. And I'm like, oh, Rupert, like that's Michael Bloomberg, smart cities, religion, well-being economy with the tokens. And it's like, oh, you could do it for bereaved people. I'm like, oh, then you're working with your interdimensional ancestor patterns. And oh, you can do it in groups. I'm like, oh, there's the psychic and computer interfacing with ancient energies of these pilgrimage paths. And so like when I'm kind of joking about like the future of computing might look like a Renaissance fair, I'm not too far off. And so I was like, well, even though you're not allowed to be Catholic in the Elizabethan times, because they kicked they burned all the monasteries and everything, like maybe we could have a covert pilgrimage in the Renaissance fair and like have some sort of side quest, for the crypto Catholics or something like that. So anyway, there's lots of possibilities there that seem really relevant, but somehow art and ritual and spirituality and squishiness and embodiment in my live action role play is how things are, the direction things are going to lean into moving forward. Oh, and there was a really cute couple that was like, we had a little performance space next to our gypsy tent, and the couple, and they had lived on the Renaissance Fair circuit for like 10 years. And the woman did like body work and yoga, and the guy was sort of like a shaman who had a mathy brother who bonded over this Shadowrun tabletop game. And so I was trying to say like, hey, I think the future of computing could look like a Renaissance fair. Like just keep your eyes open, try that lens on and see how it seems. And so she was like, I don't really understand what you're talking about, but I can feel the energy work of it. And I'm like thinking about fascia and dance, because she was a dancer and a musician, and the frequency. And then the shamany guy who had the math brother, I'm like, it's frequency and wave collapse and probability statistics, which is all of the game and the dice rolls and all of that. And so he could see that part of it. And so she said, well, you probably already know this because you know a lot of things, but the Renaissance Fair originally, what happened, came out during like sort of the Cold War era, when they were making artists in Hollywood sign loyalty oaths and like be anti-communist and all of this stuff. And I was like, oh no, I didn't actually know that. And so I looked it up, and there was this long Smithsonian article about like the radical origins of the Renaissance Fair. And the story goes that it was like a high school teacher in LA who wouldn't sign the loyalty oath. And so she decided to go off and host a Renaissance Fair with all of her arty friends who were also against like loyalty oaths, and set up a Renaissance Fair in her backyard. And where was her backyard? It was in Laurel Canyon. So, like, yes, I think I could totally be on point about the Renaissance Fair being a collective intelligence, interdimensional role play computing process. So yeah, so I have spirals, and then some of this, as I was doing it, like, so some of it was not so spirally. It was like, let me see, it was more like there were sort of like valleys. Like, you know, there were these lines that were like a valley. It was like terrain. And I keep listening to Neal Stephenson's book about terrain and his video game and magma and viscosity. And so then I started doing lines for the terrain, and then I had the spirals, and I'm like, oh, but it needs more. It needs more. And so then I started doing like all the circles and circles and circles. And as I did them, the more I did, I was like, oh, wow. This is like resonators. This is like an acoustic resonance. And so it's like a landscape of consciousness, and some of it is spirals, and some of it is linear, and some of it is emergent, and it's got all of this flow state going on, but it's contained, right? It's contained within this border, which is the enabling constraints, right? It doesn't go on forever. Like, we're here in this LARP in 3D space-time, and the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, all of these fields, like, I'm just imagining that these are good things that I'm attracting to myself. Like, these are things, positive things that I want to bring into my identity and my life and my community life. And that these resonance things are also could be archetypal patterns of people who are who've offered gifts into my life, and who have been playmates, and who have been willing to listen to my stories and my conjectures, and who created space like Renaissance fairs for me to explore new parts of my personality, and people who had gardens that offered me space to dig up Jerusalem artichoke hearts, and who gave me places to belong and be needed in a time when I didn't think anybody would need me anymore. And these are all good, wonderful things. And so tomorrow I'm going to go to our twice a month meditation, and I'm gonna wear this like magic cape, and I'm gonna talk about, I did this for my birthday for myself, like, because I can, and I don't have to feel sad about it. I'm co-creating my own reality, and my own reality is that I can make beautiful art, and I can give it meaning and give it a story. So I don't know how instructive that will be for people, but I hope it's a good update. And I promise when my bulbs are up, I will take some pictures of my garden and share. It was still in process. But it was very beautiful. You know, there's certain things that worked and certain things that didn't, right? Arkansas has borers, so you can't really grow zucchini. Or if you do, you have to wait till the borer life cycle is over. But like, I planted some radicchio midsummer and I forgot about it, and then I moved it over because I was planting a bush there, and it's like going straight through the frost and the icy rain and all of that, and making these beautiful rosettes, which is just crazy beautiful sacred geometry. And yeah, those plants, they're at that touchy point between the etheric and the solid, right? They're at that boundary crossing. And how do we play in the boundaries, right? How do we talk with the patterns? How do we talk with the devas? Oh, this is the one last thing. So this is the kind of bummer thing about my birthday is, like, I thought I had a squirrel in my attic. I have my ceilings are really low, and I could hear something, and it was a really busy time, and I was thinking, like, initially, like, maybe it'll go away, and then I was like, oh, maybe it's not that bad, and then I finally got around to it, and it turned out it was rats, which is really sucks because, you know, I lived in Philly. We had rats, but they were outside because in Philly, our row house, it was brick with plaster right on the brick, so they couldn't get up in there. They came in like a section down by my furnace unit is outside, and then there's a section where it plugs into the foundation, and they had gotten like underneath and then chewed through some foam and then went right up to the attic and set up shop. And yeah, and then the people who manage that, and I'm taking it seriously, but they're there to sell their services, so they make very extreme scary stories. And then I got sucked into the vortex of the scary stories, and I was really rattled. And then it turns out they're kind of grifters. All of these pest companies are grifters, and I'm trying to talk to the overdavas of the elementals of the house to say, like, I think you'd rather just have a nice cozy space in the woods near a creek or something, and not my attic. So initial things, but so today the HVAC people came and like built like a fortification around the base of my furnace so that this will not happen again. And I left a little hole so that they can come out, and I'm getting a one-way door so that hopefully they'll all just leave before Christmas and I have to leave. But they stole my garlic. That's how I knew something was wrong. And how I knew it was not a raccoon or squirrels was that I went for a long weekend retreat, and someone had gifted me this lovely handmade soap a while back, and I had a little stash of it in the little towel closet in my bathroom. And there was a shower panel like for the plumbing access where there wasn't a cover on it, and it hadn't really bothered me because I'd never really occurred to me that things might want to come in there that I didn't expect. And so while we were away for the weekend, they must have known that nobody was in the house. They ran a raid on the soap, and were literally stealing the soap and eating the soap and pooping in the soap. And it was a lot. It was a spectacle, right? In the live action role play, it was quite a spectacular scene. But I've gotten to a better point. There was one caught. Hopefully if there are others, they have left, and it's quieter up there now. And so, yeah, so I was dealing with the rat stuff today. Like, happy birthday. Treat yourself to some lovely rat exclusion. But, even that is a story. And by the time I kind of got midway through the hysteria of it, I'm like, and when the exterminators went and pulled the attic, like the little ladder down into the attic, and it's not an attic I store stuff in, it's just where the insulation is. And like the first thing that comes out is a snake skin, shed snake skin that's like this long, which actually, like, I've seen the king snakes around here, and I'm not like, that doesn't totally, I'm like, oh, can I have it? Like, transformation snake shed. That's good. That's a good symbol. But yeah, so the rats, I'm like, I'm just going to lean into that. Like the East, right? Year of the rat. Like that we tell stories. The West has a certain story about what rats are, and which, can be totally valid. But the East, it's like, oh, well, they're intelligent, right? They're really good navigating the dark. They're good. They forage. Like, I think they were going over to eat my neighbor's dog's dog poop because there were some things that were brought into my house. And I'm like, oh, that's really gross. But they're cleaner-uppers. Like, the world needs cleaner-uppers, right? Hopefully they're not dragging it into my attic. But like, there's a role for and they have different sensing, right? And they have these, like the whiskers they can get in small spaces. They navigate labyrinths, right? And so the more I got to think about it, I'm like, oh, well, I'm a bit rat-like, And so I've been stacking up on books. I have like stacks and stacks of books I want to read this winter. I'm going to sew and read. And yeah, so back in my elementary school days, I remember there would be the big, like the Newbery books, right? And one of the Newbery books was the Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH. And they were like superhero rats from the lab that escaped and saved the little mouse and the frail son. And so I ordered myself a copy of Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH. And yeah, I don't know if I have superhero rats up there. Hopefully they've found a nice burrow. There's a really nice one over at the portal near the Temenos. And I kind of am picturing that it's got moss. It's very attractive. Like, if they were, I think it's near a creek, it would be a really nice place for them to be. So let's all just send the energy to my visitors that they would like to relocate over to a nice cozy burrow next to a creek with some moss, not in the portal, but like in the Temenos, like, because I wouldn't mind having that intelligent wisdom sensing capability, because we we need some of that craftiness. Yeah, I feel like, oh, and the other thing is the day I took all of this plant material to the portal for the second salon session, the next day I went to go in to help my friend in her garden, and I was getting ready to sit down in the driver's seat, and I was like, oh, like I felt, when you hit a spider web and you're like, ah, and there was a big spider that was in my car. Like it must have like hitched a ride in with the plant material because it was getting colder. So things were like moving slower. And I was like, oh, whoa, we scared each other. And so I'm trying, like, I don't want to kill it, but I'm trying. I'm like, you can't stay in the car because it was like an orb weaver. It was like a chunky one. Not the black and yellow ones, but like it was a chunky one. And so I'm like trying to get my spade and like scoop it out. And it kept swinging, like doing Spider-Man moves and like swinging, woo, woo, woo. And I finally got it out, and then it promptly fell on my crystal bucket. And I was like, well, I have to go. So I just left it there. And by the time I cut back, I'd done a whole web on the garage window. I'm like, no, you can't be in there. And so I moved it out again, and I put it in the grass, and then it ran right on the driveway. And I'm like, oh. So then I did my gardening. I came back, and it had done one again on the garage door. And so there was this entanglement. Like I hadn't gotten to do the entangling art exercise because I was lecturing to the entanglers. So I was tangling with the spider. So we tangled with each other, and eventually she moved on, I think. But it took about 2 weeks. But she was really dedicated to being in my garage and vicinity sort of space. And we appreciated each other outside of the car. So again, everything in its place. And yeah, so it sort of started to feel like Charlotte's Web, right? We've got the spider, we got Templeton the rat, we got Charlotte, and we got Templeton. Like, I mean, as far as I know, we don't have a pig yet, although this is the Razorback. This is Razorback country. So anyway, I don't know when I will be back on or what I will have to say. I am going to put up some clips. I'm very, I don't think I actually shared it, but I was revisiting Ian Griggs' clip about the art project with monochrome and the laminated flower currency. And when I dipped back in, it turns out that someone revived that project supposedly outside of Ian Griggs' awareness, and put it on Solana, this Grigg flower currency. And I had this connection to someone attached to a very intriguing story about the Summer of Love, and is it like John Cook Steele, the crazy paraplegic Sufi channeler tarot guy, and the Summer of Love, and like high Sufi magic, and like this whole the flower children. And so I'm revisiting flowers again, human flourishing. And so I have a few clips that I want to put up from Ian Grigg talking about his cryptography and the flowers, because there's something about this boundary crossing. And I would just suggest, because I think I made clips and I didn't end up actually uploading them or editing them, but Glenn Weil, Microsoft's Octopest, if you guys who are like all assuming that it's some top-down authoritarian fascist, blah, 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 and you're not so sure about like, hey, maybe it's highly participatory, organic, quantum biofilm, slow lichen party, look up Glenn Weil and Audrey Tang. Again, both of whom crafted as very strong characters, if you imagine them as archetypal patterns, and they're moving towards tokenized governance with consensus-based governance protocols with Taiwan as the model. So they're making the rounds. They're all over. So again, there's aspects of it that I think maybe don't sound terrible, like a depolarized conversation with some engineered intelligence facilitation. I'm not necessarily against it. Let's just not pretend it's not Microsoft, all right? Like, let's just own it for what it is and not imagine that it's some like grassroots thing, but that it's coming from a structure. But maybe there's a story we could tell that there are parts of the structure that are not horrible. Again, it's just we actually, stories are technology, and we get to pick. And at the end of the day, and this is something I people are still going back and looking at my channel. I think someone asked like, hey, could we back up all your material? And I'm like, I'm actually a little embarrassed, because the me now is not the me of 2 or 3 years ago, is not the me of 8 years ago. Like, it has been a process. And so if you're looking at if you're here now, but you're looking at what I said 5 years ago at the beginning, And I don't think I was nearly as hysterical as many influencer people, like not that I'm an influencer, but like people, talking heads online. I think I was more balanced than a lot. um, but I still had a certain story that was a story that I was inhabiting the role that I needed to fix something, that something very bad was happening, and it was very big, and uh, there was a lot of tension, and like, we need to do this now, and timing. And I've moved into this space now of, this is an infinite game. I'm not in control. There's information asymmetry. I'm never going to know it all. I can't fix it for other people. I don't even know what other people what's right for other people. All I can do is try to navigate me authentically, knowing that I'm continuing to evolve. And so, I don't know where all of this was going, but I'm just saying, like, if you're looking at my stuff, I don't know if this is going to be helpful for people or not. It makes me sad sometimes when people are like looking at the me I was then and taking that as where, like, the thing that's relevant now, because I think what I'm intrigued by is like, what are soulbound, because Glenn Weil was doing the soulbound tokens. Like, what are these soulbound tokens, and what is this larger collective interpenetrated intelligence that Michael Levin and Richard Watson are working in? And what is Angus Fletcher's storytelling narrative and our embodied imagination, and Robert Bosnak and alchemy and ritual and drama? And can we play it for good? Like, can we play it in a way that is awesome and beautiful and loving? Because if we can, we totally should. And I think the world is way more magical and has way more affordances than we realize. And it's okay if you want to live. And actually, now, like, here I was trying to like tell people how to be with my stuff. There are some people who are going to be with my stuff a certain way, and then they're going to be with the me I was then. And there's going to be some people who are going to be with me the way I am now. And then there's the way old me that got abandoned by everybody, like my whole inner circle. And that's okay, because we're here to play. God loves variety. All the things happen. And but if you're unhappy, realize there's not that you may, like, before you live in the permanent unhappy, imagine if there's a way that you could tell a story that would give you a way out, and then fake it till you make it. So anyway, I am so grateful. I am so grateful. I am so grateful. And it's a journey, and we're doing it. We're doing it with love and magic and serendipity.